So now we get to get into the step-by-step ice dye tutorial. We've already talked about the supplies that you need. Hopefully you've been able to gather some of those, and we're ready to go and finally do this process, which is super exciting. Yay! Because now we get to make all our beautiful fabric. So before we get into that, I need to give you a little pep talk. You can't screw this up, okay? There is no wrong way to ice dye. There are different ways to ice dye, and there's different effects, and there's gonna be some pieces of ice dye fabric that you're gonna love more than others, and that's totally okay. You are gonna be so pleased with the fabric that you come up with at the end of this, and I want you to just go into this full force, just no fear. We're gonna get through this. It's gonna be awesome, and I think you're going to really enjoy it. So that's my little pep talk. Let's get into the actual process. So I've got my dishwashing tub here, and I am going to put 1 cup of soda ash in there, and I'm going to dissolve it into 1 gallon of water. And I'm going to use my dishwashing gloves to just move everything around. It actually works better if the water is a little bit warmer, I've noticed, than if it's cold. If it's cold, the soda ash tends to clump up. So just pro tip, but it works either way. But either way, you just want to stir it around with your hand and just dissolve that soda ash right there in the water. So what's cool about this is that we can reuse the soda ash water. So if you want to save this for another ice dyeing project later on, you can go ahead and do that. So now I'm just going to pop my fabric in there, and I'm going to let it sit for 15 minutes. And in that time, it's going to absorb the water. Just kind of move your fabric around, make sure that it's really getting in there. And we'll come back to it in 15 minutes. So now we've got our fabric, it's already pre-soaked, and I'm going to try and wring out as much of the soda ash water as I possibly can. That's really easy with the lightweight cottons. I'm not going to lie, it's really difficult if you've got a big, heavy, drapey knit like this modal. In fact, I ultimately just kind of gave up on it. And you know what? That's okay. If you have a fabric like that, it's still going to work out. Just don't worry about it. If you do have leftover soda ash water, we can save it for another ice dyeing project. I've had no problem storing my water like this. So just grab a funnel and just pour that water in there and save it for another time that you want to ice dye. So now you want to put your rack over the top of your tub, and we're going to take our fabric and just scrunch it up, and just kind of at random, just move it around until it's kind of all, scrunched up together. And this is going to create like some of the patterns in our fabric as the ice melts. So now grab your bag of ice and just start covering the surface of the fabric with the ice as much as you can. The one thing I like about the tub and cookie rack is that you have really no chance of the water draining out and the fabric sitting in it, but it also makes it a little bit more difficult to wedge the ice in there. So just keep working it and keep wedging that ice around it. You can use plastic wrap to kind of hold it in there together. After you have covered the ice, go ahead and put your dust mask on and grab your plastic spoon and a couple of your colors. I think with this particular fabric, I used Wedgwood blue and also peach. So this is the peach, and I'm just putting it kind of across the surface of the ice. I'm trying hard not to hit the fabric itself and get just the ice. You can see that the dye is already starting to spread out a little bit. And so then I'm going in with the second color and just kind of putting it randomly across there. You can put it in stripes, you can put it randomly, you can kind of play around with it. You can put a lot, you can put a little bit. These Procion MX dyes are very, very concentrated, so you don't have to add a ton of that. But just keep adding colors as you can see, and just make sure that you're wearing the dust mask. And when you are happy with how much dye you've added, then go ahead and we're just going to let this sit, and we are going to let the ice melt. Let's talk ice dyeing in a pot. You can see this one's fitted with a little strainer. It's a steamer pot really, and it's great because it keeps it when the water melts, the fabric is not going to sit in there. So we can just kind of pour the water off, and it's not going to bother the fabric at all. So same thing, we're just going to start scrunching up the fabric. And this is a little bit different. We're going to kind of make layers with our fabric. So I put one layer in there, I'm scrunching it, I'm adding ice. Yay, ice. I love the pots because it really holds the ice in place really well. Just kind of spread that ice over the surface of it. And I'm going to start adding my dye over this. So we're going to think of this like a little dye parfait, if you will. But yeah, don't eat it because that would not be good. So I'm going to grab my colors. On this one, I'm using peach and also a sea glass, which is kind of like this green color that I really super love. It's gonna kind of split off and make some turquoise in there. So I'm just gonna grab my plastic spoon, I have my dust mask on again, just like before, and I am just going to sprinkle the surface of the ice with all of my colors. So just a little bit at a time. Yay. Just added some more of that. I think I actually grabbed coral. I don't remember which colors I used. I had so many colors on the table when I was filming this. So there's one color down. I just put it in little stripes, kind of going back in there and filling in the gaps over the ice that I hadn't covered. And when I get done with this, I am just going to put another layer of fabric right on top of that. So it's kind of cool doing the fabric this way because what ends up happening is you dye both sides of the fabric. So both sides are coming in contact with it. So just scrunch that fabric up. And then we're going to add more ice on top of this. Yay, ice. And then we're going to add more dye. And again, you can be as specific or as random as you want to be with the dye. Just keep adding the colors just very lightly a little bit at a time with your spoon. And then just add some more colors. And we're just going to keep repeating this dye process. It's really fun. You can see how even just now the dye is starting to really sink into the ice and start melting a little bit. You start seeing some of those colors split off into the particulates of the various colors and shades that they really truly are underneath everything. So it's pretty fun. So here we go. I'm just starting to, I'm gonna add one more layer here. Maybe I'll get 2 layers. And again, just scrunching it all up. That's what's going to create some of the patterns when the ice starts to melt. More ice, more ice. I will tell you now that the colors that you're going to see on your fabric are more intense now than they will be in the finished product. And that is just that's part of the nature of it. So if you want a really, really saturated, deep color in your ice dyed product, you want to use a dye that is really, really saturated too. So go for the colors that are more in the jewel tone range and are just deeper in general because they're gonna just be more concentrated. I'm using peach, which is obviously not very dark, so it's not going to be very dark in my final product, even though it looks really intense right now. It's kind of cool to see the colors mix. You can see some like deep browns and teals and things like that, but they're not going to be there in the final product, just so you know. Okay, last layer. Just scrunch it all up. Scrunch, 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 scrunch. You could be really specific and you could fold this in really specific ways like you do for shibori dyeing, or you could just be really random. You can't mess this up. I think I said it before, just don't even be remotely afraid of this whole process. It is just really, can't mess it up. You can't mess it up. You can see I left my gloves off at this point. It was really hot outside, so I was sweating in my gloves. So last layer of ice, and I am just going to grab that dye, and I'm just going to sprinkle a little bit more over the top, and do that with the second color as well. And then when everything is all done, then we will just set this aside and let it melt, just like the other thing. If you want to protect it, you can cover it with some plastic wrap. That is always a really good idea. I'll just keep it all safe and make sure that you can just double check on everything as you're going along. So now we need to pour off any of the dye that's just melting off. We don't want the fabric to be sitting in the bottom of the fabric because it's just going to muddy up the colors. It's going to be gross. So this is where again my plastic wrap is going to come in handy. So I covered the surface of my pot with some plastic wrap. And I am just going to manhandle this pot and pour off the extra dye in there. So I am just going to grab my little container with my dye. I've already poured off some of this. With the several layers, it's going to take a while for the ice to melt. It's going to take several hours, if not overnight. This one ended up melting in about 4 hours. Again, it was a really hot day. It's going to depend on how hot it is where you are, but just go ahead and pour off the extra dye and keep pouring off more dye and checking on it periodically. So at this point, when your fabric is done, go ahead and rinse it off in cold water and wash it in a hot cycle in your washing machine. So here is some of the finish, the cotton modal jersey that we ice dyed. You can see how the watercolor effects just kind of come about on the fabric and how you just get these really interesting sort of effects all over across the surface of the fabric. So that's how you ice dye it. Let's move on to some frequently asked questions.